Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Writing Expensive Words podcast. Today we are going to be doing a real REEL story breakdown for the Queen's Gambit Part 2. And if you haven't listened to Part 1, I would say that you should probably go listen to that first. As always, the real story breakdowns are spoiler heavy. So if you haven't watched the second episode of the Queen's Gambit yet, and you want to be completely unsurprised, you should watch that first and then come back to this video where we're going to break down everything, all the juicy tidbits that will help you make your story captivating and compelling. So let's get into it. This episode's probably going to be a little bit longer than my other episodes because I have over 2.5 pages of notes just from this one episode. It took me 3 different sessions of sitting and watching it to get this down for you because there are lots of little juicy hidden nuggets of storytelling in this episode, and I cannot wait to talk about it. Let's dive in. So when we left Elizabeth Harmon, who is our protagonist, at the end of episode 1, she had just overdosed on tranquilizers. And as a result, we find out in episode 2 that her punishment is that she is no longer allowed to play chess with Mr. Scheibel. But before we go further into the story, one of the things that I want to talk about is jargon. And if you're a writer, you should know what jargon means because jargon is talking about language that's specific to a type of profession or industry. And in this case, we need to know some jargon about chess and the way that the writers introduce the lay person, the chess non-experienced, to the jargon from chess is through Mr. Scheibel. And one of the really fun things about episode 2 is that we get to see all of the things that Mr. Scheibel taught Elizabeth in episode 1 play out in real life. Yeah, I was so excited. There's just so much amazing foreshadowing. Like, I feel this series is one of the best at foreshadowing. And episode 1, we already have foreshadowing for episode 2. And then in episode 2, we basically have foreshadowing for the rest of the entire show, which is blow my mind awesome. And I want to tell you how they did it so that you can do it in your own storytelling because it's great. And anytime we see something that is really cool, or you read something, or we listen to something that's awesome and that makes us excited, we should always think, how can I break these ideas down into their most simple forms so that I can execute them in my own storytelling? That's what I do. That's how I've been able to create all of the crazy frameworks that we use at Literary Symmetry for our clients. And you can do it too. It's not like you have to have a Kristen type brain to do it. You can do it. A book that I've been reading recently that I want to recommend to you is Steal Like an Artist by Cleon. It is great because there's nothing new under the sun, right? The Bible says it. But what we can do is take awesome inspirational things, figure out how those things were put together, break them apart, and then model our own storytelling after them. It's not, that's stealing like an artist. And that's when you don't just steal someone's exact thing, but you break it apart and you figure out, how can I use this for myself? And that is the entire purpose of real story breakdowns and lit story breakdowns. So if you have to introduce jargon, you can use this method that they used inside the Queen's Gambit, where you're having one character teach something to another character in an interesting way. If Mr. Scheibel would have just sat down and been like, listen, Beth, these are all the rules of chess. I'm going to just tell you all of them, and then we're going to move to the next scene. That would have been super boring. That would not have been engaging at all. But the way that we learn it is we watch Elizabeth learn it, and we see her interacting with Mr. Scheibel in a really endearing way. And so we're like, cool, this scene is touching. But what we don't realize as a viewer is that, oh, if I don't know anything about chess, which I'll be honest, I do not know that much about chess. My brother is like a killer sniper chess player. So I avoided playing chess with him after a certain point. And yeah, Travis, my husband, he's the chess guy in our family. He's teaching my daughter Kati to play chess, and they're both really, like, it's not my thing, y'all. Okay, I'm not good at it. But we see the interactions between Beth and Mr. Scheibel, and at the same time, our brain is getting programmed with the jargon that we need to understand in order to move forward in the plot and understand what's happening to Beth. Do we understand all the intricacies of the moves that she's using if we're not super chessy? No, we don't. But, we know enough, right? And obviously people, I was watching today, I'm like, gosh, they had to like memorize these crazy chess sequences because of course they had to get it right because like in everything, there will be people out there who are really amazing at chess who are watching the show. And if something's wrong, they're going to know it. So you can't fake details like that in your story. And if you don't know a lot about something before you write it, you need to talk to someone else who does or read a ton of books. Okay, that was a little bit of a tangent, but it's relevant because it has to do with this story and it has to do with your story. Okay, so let's take a look at my notes. All right, so something really exciting supposedly happens to Beth in the second episode. We see that there are some prospective parents who come to meet her. And one of the things that happens is that Miss Deardolph has Beth lie about how old she is because she wants her to be younger to seem more appealing. And I think that's the idea, right, with adoption and with fostering is that the younger they are, the more desirable they are. And that's a huge shame. Um, I cannot tell you how many teenagers need good homes. Like they need stable environments too. They're trying to learn how to turn into and transform into an adult. That's super vital. So my heart went out to Beth, but also to a very important character we met in the first episode, Jolene, who has realized at this point that she's not going to be adopted. And Beth even says to her, I'm sorry. And she's like, about what? And she's like, that you didn't get adopted. And it's so heartbreaking. And you're like, and you're like, I wish that Jolene could be in this show for every episode. And I know a lot of people have talked about that on the internet. So maybe there will be a spinoff. I don't know. That would be amazing. If it's written in the same style, I'm down. I would totally watch it. I'll probably watch it more than once, like I'm doing with this series. So Beth gets adopted, and while she's like packing up her stuff to leave, she realizes that she doesn't have her chess book. Her chess book is missing, and there's been a time jump forward, obviously, because they're like kind of smallish in the first episode, and then now they're teenagers. But so Beth can't find her book about chess that Mr. Scheibel gave her, and it's making her upset. And Jolene's like, she's like, did you take my book? And she's like, well, why would I need a book like that? Which of course is a true statement because obviously Jolene does not play chess. But if you're like, Kristen, I have to know what happened to the book. Just hold on. We're going to get there. It's coming back around. And that's one of the really fun experiences I've been having while going back through this show for a second time is that I can see all the little nods. I can see the meticulous planning that went into this story. So Beth gets adopted by a couple, Alston and Alma Wheatley. And that's something that I personally wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have given both of the characters who are her adoptive parents names that start with the same letter because that's confusing. But for the most part in the beginning of episode number 2, they're Mr. and Mrs. Wheatley to her, right? She doesn't call them mom and dad. And Mr. Wheatley is like, ugh. So we find out that Beth has been adopted and we're like, yay. But then we're like, meh, meh, because we find out that the family that she's been adopted to, Alston and Alma Wheatley, that they have some serious, like messed upness, like they're very unhealthy going on. They have lost a child, which I'm going to circle back around to in this episode because there's this one line that I was like, wait, what? But so they've lost a child and they wanted an older kid. And even when Beth is like, it doesn't seem like Mr. Wheatley likes me, Alma Wheatley is like, oh, on the contrary, dear, which she talks like that throughout the whole thing. And it's, it's something you could pull off in written dialogue because, I always talk about how you shouldn't use accents, you shouldn't use slang, but obviously this is a period piece. I would say that it's historical fiction, right? It's based on a real time period. And so the language that she uses would work in written dialogue, and it really communicates that era, like that she says, on the contrary. Now we wouldn't say that, or we wouldn't say dear at the end of everything. There are people around this part of the country where I live in Pennsylvania who call everyone dear, but I feel like they're mostly like over 60. So it's not a modern phraseology that we would use, but in this instant, it works very effectively. So she's with the Wheatleys, and we get to see her go into a public school, a school outside of the Methuen home for the first time, which to me, I was like, yes, I'm so excited for her. And then we find out that not only do they not have a chess club where you're like, what the heck? Come on, universe, like throw her a bone. But that they have these clubs, but the only way you get to be in them is if you're invited. What? But I know that's what it was like back then in that time period, but it just sucks. It's like bullying to the next level. And I think that the viewer really feels for not only Beth, but like some of the other girls around her, because they're like, that would suck. Like now, if you could only join a club by invitation, that would be considered like elitist or racist or all these other things, right? And so we don't, our modern concept of life really makes it so that we're predispositioned by these facts to connect with Beth even more and to care about her even more, because things are just not going that great for her. So she goes to the school, and then the girls, all right, the mean girls, there are mean girls in every generation. The mean girls make fun of her because she's basically poor, which she's going to figure out really soon in this episode. And she has really bad, like what they consider unfashionable shoes and dress. And then on top of it, of course, she's super smart. She is able to explain what a binomial is when no one else is able to in the math class. And then the girl's like, oh, great, another effing brain. And of course, there's language in the show, but there's no language in the show, so I censored it. And so you're just like, come on, like, is Beth really better off in the situation than she was in the Methuen home? And at first, we're not sure. And it's that uncertainty that's like propelling us forward. We're like cartwheeling down the hill of this story because we have to find out, is this worse? Like, should we be happy for her? I have to know. So we then are shown, because Mr. Wheatley's like, oh, he comes home from his traveling salesman job, and he's like, doesn't she ever change her clothes? Because he's nothing but like snarky and rude throughout the whole thing, of course. And so Alma's like, oh, I guess we should, go get you some new clothes. And they go bargain clothes shopping, basically, is what Beth finally figures out, because the girls at school are like, oh, did you go to that store? I would never go there. I would be caught dead going there. But she wants to fit in, and she doesn't. And I wonder if you can guess what I'm going to say. What is that? Wanting to fit in, but not being able to fit in? That is a point of connection for the viewer, because it is a very relatable thing to happen to a person or to a character. How many of us have felt like we didn't fit in? If you if you read my newer book, Realize Your Story, Transform Your Life, I start out with a very universal type tale like this, where I was like, listen, I grew up on the wrong side of the train tracks. I was too white for the people who lived near me, and I wasn't rich enough for the white people who like lived on the other side, And it's that point of connection, which in my case was a true story. It's the point of connection that makes you care even more about the character. And this is one of those universal things. So anytime you can pull in a universal theme that many people relate to for your character, you're going to win brownie points. You're going to win connection points with the reader. And we also see that Beth asks for a chess set at the store, and Mrs. Wheatley is like, oh, well, dear, I'm going to start giving you 40 cents a week for an allowance. And like for us, we might be like 40 cents, that's nothing. But at that point, you can tell, right? Inflation is an insane thing. It's like entropy, it will never go away. But the money was worth far more at that point. Okay, page 2 of my notes. So Beth goes to the library. Woo! Right. Anytime a character goes to a library in like a book or a movie, I'm always like, yes, the library, because the library is like my home planet. It's where all the books live, and that's where I love to be. And the best part about libraries, if you don't know, I feel like if you don't know this, I'm helping you out, is that you can read books for free. You can listen to audiobooks for free. You don't have to pay anything. If you have a public library, you can read. You can learn hard things. That was something that was really rough for us living in Greece, was like there was no library where we could get books. And I don't know if there is now. I know you can go to the Stavros near our host center, and there's like a million books in there. I don't know how many are in Greek, how many are in English, etc. But at least it exists now, so that's cool. So she goes to the library to look for books on chess and finds out that there are chess players called Grand Masters. And this is another instance of we're learning jargon the same time that Beth is learning them. And it doesn't feel like, oh, the person who wrote this is explaining this to me. It gives you this organic knowledge accumulation, and that's exactly what you want. So she finds out that there are players called grandmasters, and so the librarian tells her to get the Jose Capablanca book. I couldn't read my writing there for a second. So she goes to get the book, and she sees it, and you can see like on her face this insane, like childlike joy that she found the book, that she gets to read this book for free. Because at this point she still has like no money, no resources. But the thing is, she sees like the mean girl, right? The number one mean girl, of course. She sees the mean girl making out and getting groped by this guy. And the girl notices her, and she's like, I noticed you, Beth Harmon, because of your shoes. And ugh. So, but we do see in this that and this is like a theme throughout the story, is there's this loss of innocence with Beth, but also this urge to explore her sexuality, which is a really big driving force as we get further into the story. And we're not going to talk about it this episode, but it's coming up, and we're going to talk about sexual tension as a driving force to get the reader through the book. And we're going to talk about when it works and when it's a gimmick that falls flat, because it can be both. You can't just depend on sex for everything. Okay. So in real life and in storytelling. So Beth gets the book, and she's reading it. And then we see that Mrs. Wheatley, who's randomly doing horribly, by the way, she says that she has a proclivity for viruses. Proclivity is another one of those words, right, that we don't really use now. But she asks Beth to go get her medication from the. Wait, no, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. She asks Beth to go buy cigarettes for her and gives her a note. And Beth goes to the store, and while she's like waiting for him to get the cigarettes and ring it up, she sees a magazine about chess. And yes, it's one of those moments where like, woo! Because anytime she's excited, you're excited, because they've done such a great job of making you root for her, which is a lot of reasons, but obviously she's got the Anne of Green Gables thing going for her. She's got red hair, and she's an orphan, y'all. Okay, so she goes to buy the cigarettes, and she sees the chess review, and when she opens it up, she sees a tournament calendar. This is like I would say this is probably the inciting incident. This, not learning chess, but like realizing, oh my gosh, I can make this my life. Well, we could say learning chess is the inciting incident. It happens so early. I would have to figure out like the timeline and everything, but this is definitely a big one. This is a plot point for sure. So she sees that there are tournaments, and what she ends up doing is she pretends to buy a newspaper, and then she old school shoves the magazine inside and walks out of the store, and she's reading it, and she's talking to Mrs. Wheatley about it. And Mrs. Wheatley is kind of clueless. And also, like I said, I would say that she suffers from depression, which she's had a child die and her husband is never home. And so, yeah, we can understand, right? We can relate to that. It makes sense. But of course, back then they wouldn't say, oh, she's depressed because of all these things. They give her they give her the tranquilizer pills that they gave Beth in the beginning and say that she needs tranquility. So Beth becomes aware of the money problems in this conversation after she's gotten the magazine, and Miss Wheatley's like, oh, I just used the last of the instant coffee, I only have this many dollars, but that's not enough to get to the end. Beth is like, is that enough? And she's like, for the end, to get to whenever Mr. Wheatley comes back, probably not. And so Beth realizes, because she's a problem solver, that she can make money at the tournament and help take care of them. But the problem is she doesn't have the money to enter into the tournament, right? Because it's like a pot. Everyone who enters pays in, and then at the end, the winner gets a prize. So she decides she's going to write to Mr. Shively, throwback to Mr. Shively, right? And she decides she's going to write and ask him for the $5 to enter into the tournament, and she'll send him 10 if she wins. And we're going to find out all about that later. Because that's the thing I love about this series is there's really nothing that happens where they don't talk about it in another episode later on and describe what has happened and why that moment was important. And we obviously know, right, that Beth needs to be entering into chess tournaments because chess is her thing, and that's how she's going to preserve herself and Mrs. Wheatley from not having food to eat, because they're starving type of poor at this point. So then we see her going to get the tranquilizers, and Beth realizes, oh my gosh, this is the same tranquilizer I was addicted to at the Methuen home. So she takes some, she's stealing some for herself, and that's going to come into play at the end of this episode. Beth sees, she goes into the pharmacy to get the tranquilizers, right? And she looks at the chess review, and who is on the cover? And I did not realize this at all the first time I was watching it. It's Benny Watts. See, so when you're maybe you're thinking, Kristen, there's no way that all these characters get introduced in this episode. Benny Watts is the only chess character besides Vasily, the Russian player, who is not introduced in this episode, but he is, because we see his picture on the magazine, and there's just so many tiny and important moments of foreshadowing in this series. Like I said, they're so good at it, and people who are reading, people who are watching love foreshadowing because it's pre-framing their brain to be excited when the thing that you foreshadow actually happens, and that gives them a hit of dopamine, and they're all, yes, my brain is rewarding me for engaging with this story. It's awesome. It's awesome for storytellers. It's awesome for story hearers or story readers. Okay, so the chess competition. This is where you get to meet all the main players, and they're maybe not in every episode, but every single person she meets is going to come back around. Not every person she plays, but every person that she engages with in a meaningful way, they're going to be coming back, y'all. They're going to be, some of them are going to be extremely instrumental in this story. And so these are the people that she meets. She meets Harry Beltic. I personally think that Harry Beltic's character arc is the most stark and compelling in this whole series. You might be like, well, what about Beth? Okay, yeah, Beth is compelling too. But I am telling you, just wait. I am going to dive all the way into this Harry Beltic character in the coming episodes. He is awesome. There are some mistakes he makes. Okay, we all make mistakes. But I just think his character arc is really shaped like a bell, and it's lovely to watch him in this episode when you know what's coming later. So she also meets the twins, Matt and Mike, who are going to become instrumental as well. And they're just who is this girl? Because she comes up and she asks all these questions. And as the episode progresses, she asks more and more questions. And one of the things that I really love about her, and that I think endears her to viewers, is that she doesn't care when people get annoyed at how many questions she's asking, and she doesn't seem ashamed that she doesn't know what some of these people consider to be common sense things. Of course she doesn't know about chess. She was living with Mr. Scheibel and they took away all the chess stuff, right? Like, she has no point of reference for what a chess competition will be like, what a grandmaster is, how to get rated. And also, as I've mentioned, this is a way for us to learn the jargon that's involved with chess playing without us feeling annoyed like we're having some kind of chess lesson. We're learning it along with Beth. She also meets Annette Packer, who is the girl she's playing. And when they're playing,
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh my gosh. I said sorry and it thought I said Siri. That scared me. So we also meet Annette Packer, who they're playing, right? And then Beth is like, are they supposed to put the girls together? And she's like, they're not supposed to, but they do. But if you if you progress, they'll have to put you against guys. And so we see the idea that women are still definitely the underdogs in the chess playing world and in society at large in this historical fictional narrative. Okay, she also meets D.L. Towns, who is going to be a really important character for lots of different reasons. But you can see when she's playing him, what she's doing is she's like touching her lips. So there's a suggestion that, she has an attraction to him. She's 14 or 15 at this point. She's, they lied about her being 13, and he's definitely in college. So there's an age difference, but that's not their biggest obstacle. We will talk about their biggest obstacle later. Okay. So she learns about chess clocks and touch move from Annette. Annette is just a really charming character. Also, at the end of this episode, when finally Beth has progressed and she's beat Towns and she's beat everybody else, she's gonna play Harry Beltic. And when she beats Towns, she realizes that she started her period for the first time. And she goes into the bathroom and she's like, I thought I was sick. And Annette comes in to talk to her and she helps her. Like, she gives her, I don't, it's like pads or a tampon or something. But Beth doesn't know how to use it. So she just throws it in the trash and like uses a wad of TP, which is the old school way to go. And we see that, Annette is like there to guide her through a lot of these first moments. First time playing in a tournament, first time having her period. And she's like, yeah, I throw up every time I get my period. And so we're like, okay, well, back then they would have been like, oh, that's difficult. And then now they would probably do some diagnosis to see whether or not she has endometriosis. Right. So we just see there's like a lot of nods toward the historical setting, but also these meaningful relationships. And yes, Annette is coming back. I wish she was coming back in a different way, but it's going to be upsetting. I'll just say that. So, and then we learn after she's won. Okay, well, she goes against Harry Beltic and she beats him because he lets the clock run because he's like, I feel like it's his way of saying, how dare you make me play a girl? And obviously Beth is young. She's like straight out a girl. But he is just an arrogant jerk face. And in the end, he loses. And the fact that he lost is going to spin his character into a completely different trajectory than if he had won. And he's going to do something cool and he's going to learn from this moment, which we're going to see in the next few episodes. So when Beth gets home, she tells Mrs. Wheatley that she has won. But Miss Wheatley is like a mess. And we find out that Mr. Wheatley has left. And Beth is like, well, are they going to take me away if you don't have a husband? She's like, you've described it aptly, dear, with the dear always. And she's like, not if we lie about it. And then Beth's like, well, that's easy enough. And she's like, you're such a good soul. But I think that's before she wins, actually. And so then when she wins and Mrs. Wheatley is looking through the chess review, she realizes, dang, we can actually make some money and like provide for our family. And Beth gets to play chess, which she loves. So it's a win-win. And she comes up with the scheme of telling the school that Beth has mononucleosis, and which she read about in a magazine. And I just have to say, like, I love how clever Mrs. Wheatley is. Like, she's figured out the money about going to Cincinnati for the next tournament. She's figured out an excuse, and you can tell, like, she is sharp. Mr. Wheatley is losing out, and he's a jerk. So, but the one thing that she says is like, now that I'm no longer a wife, maybe I can learn to be a mother. And that's when I was like, ding, I'm super interested because you know she was a mom. You know that her child died. So, what is she saying? Is she saying that she was never a good mother, that she really never knew how to be a mother to a child, and that now she's willing to learn because she is responsible for Beth? And then in the next scene, we see that Beth looks in the reflection of the window, her own reflection, and sees her mother looking back at her and remembers the thing that her mom said right before she died. So it's just a really nice moment where we see that Beth is missing her real mom, but at the same time, she's embracing the now that she's in with Mrs. Wheatley. Okay. And also, we see that in the tournament with Harry, sorry. Yeah, Harry, with Harry Beltic. I have like so many names written down on my paper. That's the thing about this many characters is in a book, I would have notes as I'm reading if this were in a book because it's just so many people. But in television and in film, it's easier to have a larger cast. And I will talk about that. I'll do a whole show about numbers of characters in books and how to help your reader keep track of them. So we see that when she's losing and freaking out, like at some point she starts panicking while she's playing Harry because she's like, oh my gosh, I can't win. She goes in the bathroom and she takes the tranquility pill, the tranquilizer, and she's able to do that thing that she does where she plays through the rest of the board on the ceiling in her head. Like she can see the physical board when she's on the medication. So, and if you're like, I wish you would stop using the tranquilizers. Listen, you're not alone, but this is something that the show is going to deal with head on. And we saw in the beginning, right, that like she was in a room and she was like super hungover and she was a mess. So we're going to see how addiction shapes her life. And also we're going to see I can't reveal too much without like just giving it away. So we're going to see how her playing on the ceiling plays into everything in the final episode. It's very satisfying. I'm going to save that part 6 or something. I don't know how many episodes there are right now. I'm spacing, but we're going to save that we're going to talk about that in the final episode because it's one of those things that's just like the ultimately satisfying moment. But I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Stop trying to trick me. Okay, so I feel like there was a lot of stuff we could glean from this episode of the show, and we need to remember, here are the key takeaways. You have to have relatability, universal experiences, starting your period for the first time. Hello, if you're a woman or you know a woman, that's something that you've experienced, right? Or not fitting in, wanting nicer things. Understanding that someone you love or someone who's responsible for you doesn't love you back or can't take care of you. These are all things that many of us have gone through. They're universal. And we also learned how to deal with jargon in a way where we can learn with the character and not be talked at by the writer so that we know what the jargon is. So next time you're going to write a story that has jargon or that has characters, you know how to do it with the viewer, with the reader, not for the reader. And you also know how to mix and sprinkle in those amazing moments of relatability. I hope that you have gotten some great little juicy nuggets, like I promised, out of this episode. And remember, it is never too late to write the story of your heart. Happy writing.